Hello everyone, I'm Tonejit Gad-Harry from the University of Bristol. Thank you for the opportunity to share my reflections on the subject that's reshaping not only the mechanics of organizations, but the very fabric of employment itself. My keynote explores how digital technologies from AI to algorithmic management are not just tools, but transformative infrastructures and how they influence organizational structures and employment relationships, rewriting how work is organized, experienced, and governed. While I argue that digital technologies like AI platforms and algorithms are not neutral tools, they are transformative infrastructures that redefine how organizations function and how work is experienced. The central question I pose is, as these digital systems increasingly govern the workplace, how do we ensure fairness, accountability, and inclusion? To understand the role of technology in organizations, we must first adopt a sociological lens. What does the sociology of technology reveal? The sociology of technology asks not only what technology does, but who it empowers, who it marginalizes, and whose values are embedded in its design. According to Olikowski, the sociology of technology is primarily driven by the type and nature of influence. This refers to the relationship between technology and organizational dimensions that constitute the model in which the technology operates simultaneously and not sequentially. And as the model integrates macro and macro levels of social analysis and structures by demonstrating the relationship between humans and the institutional structures. In this context, technology is influenced by and is a product of human actions, as seen in the design and development, the modification and appropriation of tools. So for technology to be used, it has to be appropriated by humans. And in this exercise of human agency, there's always a possibility that humans may choose not to use the technology or to use it in ways that undermine its normal operation. At the same time, human actors are influenced by institutional structures such as standards, processes, professional norms, and available resources in terms of time, money, and skills. People do not work in a vacuum. They're constantly influenced by the values, interests, expertise, power, culture, and so on that surround them. So to act meaningfully in organizations, individuals draw on existing stocks of knowledge, resources, and norms to perform their work, often doing so, often doing so only implicitly. Now, consequently, this technology influences organizational institutions by reinforcing or transforming the system of significance, power, and legitimacy. So when human actors or agents use technology, they act upon the institutional structure of an organization, either by sustaining it, which is a typical situation, or by changing it, which is less frequent. As seen in the diagram, the construction and use of technology is conditioned by organizational structures, resources, and norms, which constitute an organization's system of signification, power, and legitimacy. This creates opportunities to either reinforce those structures through users conforming, often unwittingly, to the embedded rules and assumptions regarding the technology, or to undermine and even transform the institutional structures through users appropriating technology in ways that deviate from its sanctioned usage. Simultaneously, technology is a medium that either facilitates or constrains human actions, which are interactions through the provision of interpretative schemes, facilities, and norms. This therefore raises further questions on who builds the system and what values are embedded in them. Unlike the shift to remote and hybrid work we've seen, the disruption we are now seeing is through AI, automation, blockchain, and algorithmic management, and how they are woven into the organization structure, which now redefines the nature of work. This shows that technology is not neutral. They are reshaping work by design. Work is no longer defined by a physical place. Work is now determined by who controls the platform, who writes the codes, and who governs the data. As Langdowina says, artifacts have politics. Therefore, this means that technologies aren't just serving organizations, they're reshaping them. While most scholars argue that AI will replace jobs, I'll argue that AI doesn't just replace jobs, it rewrites processes. In the same vein, blockchain doesn't just decentralize data, it reconfigures trust. Platforms do not just match supply and demand, they mediate control. Sociologists like Langdon Winner and Sheila Jasanoff remind us of the terminology technological politics, which means that technology always has a social context. This implies that societies shape and are shaped by technological advancements. These technologies are not inevitable. They emerge from social decisions, political pressures, and economic priorities. Langdon argues that technological artifacts can be designed or configured in ways that embed social and political values, effectively becoming instruments of power. For example, the workplace algorithm doesn't simply schedule shifts. It decides who gets stable income in terms of the analytics it gathers about how people work and what people prefer to do and who doesn't. That is a political act, often beyond regulatory scrutiny. Now, in this context, what gets coded reflects power, which reflects the economic, political, and legal dimensions in organizations. And consequently, there's not only a change in tools, but how we define work, how workers are defined, and how the workplace is structured. We've also seen that digital technologies are pushing organizations away from traditional hierarchies where roles and responsibilities are fixed. Authority flows in a top-down approach towards a platform-based fluid network, which is agile as power is shifted to allow inclusivity and decentralization. The integration of advanced technologies create new ways of organizing work, blending human and digital contributions in unprecedented ways, which results in the emergence of configurations that require the reorganization of roles, responsibilities, and workflows. Now, team across borders using platforms like Slack or Notion, but decision-making is increasingly informed, if not determined, by algorithmic logic. This is more than structural. It's a cultural definition. We also see changes in mission statements, reimagined workflows, and a blend of digital and human decision-making. What we see now are platform-based ecosystems, dynamic, data-driven, and often non-geographic and flatter in appearance. The shift to this structure not only changes where work happens, but also shifts the organization's identity, which again influences how employees interact, collaborate, and innovate. An example is Hive Group in China. It dismantled this bureaucratic model and now operates as 4,000 plus micro enterprises using digital dashboards to connect teams directly to customers, removing the traditional layers of control as people are more governed by protocols than by people. These shifts raise questions about governance, responsibility, and accountability. Who is the manager when decisions are made by by dashboards? What happens to duty of care when authority is distributed? However, while these disruptions have brought opportunities, they also pose some challenges to social cohesion and communication, as there can be a loss of informal interactions and fewer points of contact, making it difficult to maintain social relationships and team-based activities. There's also an increased need to adapt quickly to new opportunities and challenges brought by these technologies, driven by constant updates and upgrades, which come at a cost. Now, a very good example of a modern organization thriving in automation and algorithm management is Amazon. Instead of floor managers, algorithmic systems now monitor productivity, tracking every scan, step, and break in real time. Workers use platforms that facilitate teams without borders and are managed by metrics, disciplined by dashboards, and sometimes even fired by automated triggers. With blurred boundaries of authority and liability in place, this is algorithmic management in its purest form, and it also makes us think about questions of who has recourse when the system errs, where is human oversight in these processes, and critically, Can an algorithm hold legal responsibility? These are no hypothetical dilemmas. They are playing out in tribunals and labor courts right now. We're also seeing a redefinition of what it means to be employed in these digital workspaces. Employment itself is being redefined. Remote, hybrid, gig, and contract-based models now intersect in complex ways. Employment used to mean regular hours, a physical workspace, and a contract. But now, a worker today may interact more with apps than with people. Their contracts are smart, their tasks are gig-based, and their feedback comes from customer ratings. Now, it can mean being summoned by a smartphone notification and evaluated by a customer review or governed by algorithmic rules. These digital systems blur boundaries between employee and contractor, freedom and control, and choice and coercion. An example is seen in the Uber versus ICILLP case, where the UK Supreme Court ruled that Uber drivers were workers, not self-employed. Now, the court ruled that Uber drivers were not independent contractors, but workers entitled to benefits because of a high level of algorithmic control exercised by the app. This landmark case underscores how algorithmic systems are being used as managers. This is significant as a technology not just defines the terms, but also defines the employment relationship, as smart contracts, gig apps, and invisible metrics are now doing what HR departments once did, but without the same accountability. While these models enable agility, they still raise issues on legal and ethical questions. When platforms structure work without conventional employers, who is liable? What happens when decisions once made by managers are now delegated to dashboards? The blurring boundaries of digital and human decision-making is not just a management issue, it is a governance challenge. We must ask, who is responsible when those systems are opaque, biased, or accountable? Is this the future of work or the future of risk redistribution? Before we move into the ethical and legal challenges of digital transformation, let's take a step back and consider a deeper question. What kind of power is embedded in the technologies we use? The sociology of technology reminds us that digital systems are not neutral. They reflect the assumptions, values, and interests of their designers and organizations, and in doing so, they reshape how authority, control, and accountability operate within the workplace. This raises some legal tensions on who is accountable in these fluid, decentralized models where the boundaries of authority are technology-driven and blurred. This compels us to think liability, intent, and harm in digitally governed workspaces. One of the most complex dimensions of digital work is its cross-border nature. While digital work is global, legal protections are still largely national and often outdated. Platform companies can shift risk and responsibility across borders, operating a regulatory gray zone. In many countries, the law still assumes a fixed workplace and a named employer. For example, a graphic designer in Nairobi may be working for a client in Berlin via a platform registered in California with pay routed through a fintech firm in Singapore. When conflict arises, say dispute over pay or unfair dismissal, whose jurisdiction applies, whose labor law protects the worker? The law in many cases hasn't caught up, as there are gaps in protection and jurisdictional mismatch. However, there are promising moves. Alongside some national laws, the EU AI Act has been created to regulate high-risk AI systems, including those used in HR and hiring. Also, the GDPR provides workers with a legal basis to challenge data processing and algorithmic decisions. And the ILO Global Guidance on Platform Work establishes a baseline for rights and protections. However, enforcement is weak, as there have been limited regulations and oversight in place to monitor and control their impact. Therefore, there's an inadequate coordinated labor framework that addresses the algorithmic accountability, platform neutrality, and digital due process. Despite these challenges, this is also a moment of unprecedented opportunity. This disruption also offers an opportunity to think differently about governance. Rather than asking how to make digital work fit into old legal boxes, we should ask, what legal reforms do we need for the world we are building? We can reimagine employment models that are both flexible and fair. Imagine systems where workers can see how algorithmic decisions are made, and then they can challenge them. Example, the Spain's rider law. Example is Spain's rider law. Spain became the first country to legally require food delivery platforms to disclose algorithms that affect working conditions. This marked a breakthrough in transparency in algorithmic management as a labor right. We can also design systems that do not just automate, but empower. Imagine if transparency in algorithm management became a right. So workers can audit decisions affecting their pay and conditions. We can also think beyond law alone towards co-governance, where workers, technologists, and policymakers co-design systems and establish ethical standards for work. This is a powerful example of co-creation with workers and technologies, right-based digital innovation. We can see an example in countries like Kenya, India, and Estonia, where ethical design, algorithmic auditing, and digital labor cooperative are already emerging. This helps in rebuilding trust in the workplace, which means embedding values, not just functions, or the focus on the use of the technologies into the design of the digital systems. Let me close with a reflection and a provocation. Digital technologies are not going away, but the ways they shape work are still open to contestation. Digital systems can be tools of liberation or control. Whether they entrench inequality or empower workers depends on the framework we build around them. Most importantly, we are not just witnessing the workplace transformation as we are shaping the conditions of working life for generations to come. The way we embed values into the systems will determine whether work becomes more inclusive or more precarious. We must move beyond retrofitting 20th century laws into digital problems. Instead, we must build new inclusive framework fit for a world of remote teams, algorithmic bosses, and data-driven decisions. So I leave you with this. In a world governed increasingly by code, who writes the rules and who enforces the rights? That is the defining question for the future of work. I thank you for your time and attention. I hope this session has sparked ideas, concerns, and perhaps some discomfort. That's where real thinking begins. I welcome your challenges and your insights. Let's keep this conversation going, because shaping the future of work is not a job for technologists alone. It is a shared responsibility across law, policy, design, and practice. Thank you.